Madam Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 4251, the Smart Port Security Act, and yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized for such time as he may consume.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased that the House is meeting today to consider H.R. 4251, the Smart Port Security Act. This bill includes a number of Democratic-sponsored provisions aimed at improving our nation's maritime security. Representative Loretta Sanchez authored a provision to strengthen the integrity of the TWIC program. Representative Laura Richardson authored language to allow port operators to use their grant funds to secure provided by local law enforcement. Representative Clark of Michigan authored a provision relating to northern border security. H.R. 4251 also includes language modeled after a bill I introduced, H.R. 1105, to relieve the nation's port and transportation workers from the hassle and expense of renewing their 5-year TWIC cards, given that DHS has not done its job to fully implement this security program. Specifically, Section 206 of this bill will relieve current TWIC holders, the men and women who work in our ports, from being required to secure new identification cards beginning in October 2012, given that DHS has not even issued a draft rule for biometric readers. For the full security potential of the TWIC program to be realized, there must be readers installed at ports to match the biometric cards with the individuals presenting them. Since 2007, over 2.1 million longshoremen, truckers, merchant mariners, and rail and vessel crew members have undergone extensive Homeland Security and criminal background checks and paid a $132.50 fee to secure TWICs. Since H.R. 4251 was considered by the full committee, DHS has taken positive steps to address the upcoming TWIC renewal predicament. Specifically, DHS recently announced that starting this August, workers will be eligible for a 3-year TWIC renewal card at a discounted rate and with fewer visits to the enrollment center. With this is a positive development, more must be done. The bill before us today allows workers to continue to use their TWICs for the next 2 years while providing an incentive for DHS to move forward on readers as soon as possible. I will be inserting into the record on a general leave a letter we received today from Transportation Trades Department, AFL-CIO, expressing their support for this bill and the provision making common sense changes to the TWIC program. With that, Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time. Madam Speaker, I would note that my support for the Smart Port Security Act is rooted in not only the improvements in the TWIC program, but also what it seeks to do to improve coordination and cooperation between DHS's maritime components and strengthen procurement practices. This bill is the result of bipartisan effort to strengthen the security of America's ports and waterways and ensure the Department of Homeland Security's maritime security efforts are effective and efficient as practicable. With that, Madam Speaker, I urge the passage of H.R. 4251 and yield back.
The gentleman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 4005, the Gauging America Port Security Act, and yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this bill, authored by Representative Janice Hahn, a member of the Committee on Homeland Security, would require the Secretary of Homeland Security to conduct a study of the gaps in port security in the United States. The study, which would be submitted to Congress, must set forth a prioritization of those security gaps and a plan for addressing them. Finally, the bill would require that the Secretary of Homeland Security to share relevant port security information as appropriate with federal, state, and local government partners, as well as port owners and operators who are involved in protecting ports. Given the importance of America's ports and waterways to our nation and its economy, they are an attractive target for terrorists and criminals. The impact of a terrorist attack on a major port would be catastrophic, with massive economic losses in addition to probable loss of life. By requiring a comprehensive assessment of port security vulnerabilities and a plan for addressing them, we will be one step closer to making our ports and our nations more secure. With that, Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Mississippi.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of H.R. 1447, the Aviation Security Stakeholder Participation Act, and yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, effective coordination between stakeholders and the regulators is critical to the implementation of policies that work. To that end, we have the responsibility to ensure that policy is informed by the realities on the ground. Arguably, nowhere is the need for policy coordination more important than at our nation's airports. Given that the aviation sector remains an attractive target for terrorists, the difference between a security policy that works and one that does not can be all that stands between life and death. That is why I introduced H.R. 1447, the H.R. Security Stakeholders Participation Act. This legislation will ensure that the voices of those subject to policies and protocol put in place by TSA are heard and their recommendations are considered. It does so by directing the TSA to establish an Aviation Security Advisory Committee. For years, such an advisory committee existed and worked effectively with TSA on matters such as aviation security methods, equipment, and procedures. For instance, in 2003, the ASAC Cargo Working Group, which included the Cargo Airline Association, made recommendations that form the basis of TSA's program for 100% screening of air cargo. Unfortunately, during the last administration, the charter for this advisory committee was allowed to lapse and the committee ceased operation. While I'm pleased that in response to my bill, the Obama administration reestablished this committee on its own authority, I strongly believe that it is critical that the Aviation Security Advisory Committee be codified in law to ensure that TSA's aviation security policy continues to be informed by the private sector. That is why my bill would, for the first time, establish the Aviation Security Advisory Committee in statute and require that representatives from up to 27 member organizations participate. I introduced H.R. 4447 in April of 2011 with the ranking member of the Transportation Security Subcommittee of the Committee on Homeland Security, Representative Jackson Lee. It was favorably reported on a bipartisan basis in November 2011. TSA has the responsibility to secure the American public from threats posed to our transportation sector. However, it cannot do so in a vacuum. TSA must leverage technical and operational expertise from our nation's airports to deliver a collaborative and robust security system across our aviation sector. Strong partnerships with aviation stakeholders are critical to informing aviation security policy. Just last month, the committee received testimony from the Airport Minority Advisory Council about arbitrary limitations set forth by TSA on the issuance of airport worker badges to airport-based small businesses like newsstands, coffee, and souvenir shops. Since then, TSA has committed to reevaluate the policy and work with the private sector to address the concerns raised. To this just one example of how a TSA policy developed without input from the advisory committee was not informed by economic realities. Now, TSA is in the position of having to revisit this and other ill-informed policies to ensure that they enhance security in a manner that does not unduly burden the private sector. My bill also directs the administrator of TSA to establish 3 targeted working groups to address the unique Homeland Security challenges related to air cargo security, general aviation security, and perimeter security. Mr. Speaker, all of us have a stake in ensuring the security of our nation. Let us pass this bill so that stakeholders who are expected to comply with the policies and procedures developed by TSA have a seat at the table. That way, we can be confident that TSA's policies are both effective from a security standpoint and address the economic and commercial realities of our nation's airports. Before reserving the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to engage in a brief colloquy with the gentleman from New York, the chairman of the Committee on Homeland Security, Mr. King. Mr. Speaker, as this bill has made its way to the House floor, the chairman and I have been engaged in ongoing dialogue over how to strike the right balance on who should be represented on the Aviation Security Advisory Committee. I'm dedicated to ensuring that the voices of passengers and small and minority-owned businesses impacted by TSA's policies, procedures, and regulations are heard. It is important that persons representing those groups have a seat at the table when TSA makes decisions that affect both passengers' rights and business bottom lines. With that, Mr. Speaker, I would yield to the gentleman from New York for his assurance that this bill continues its movement through the legislative process. He will work with me to ensure these important populations are included in this Aviation Security Advisory Committee legislation. Mr. Speaker, I would like to express my gratitude to all the members of the Committee on Homeland Security for their unanimous support of this legislation when it was considered by the committee last September. While the Committee on Homeland Security has not been as active on the legislative front as I had hoped it would be this Congress, I'm pleased that several discrete bills introduced by both Democrats and Republicans have received bipartisan support on the House floor during the last month. I'll be submitting for the record letters of support for H.R. 1447 from three prominent aviation stakeholders: the U.S. Travel Association, Airport Council International North America, and the Cargo Airline Association. With that, Mr. Speaker, I urge all my colleagues to vote aye on the Aviation Security Stakeholders Participation Act and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back.